Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are in Parshat Noach this morning. We are in the Parsha about, of course, both the destruction of everything and about the Tower of Babel, and everyone looking to have one language and building a tower to the sky, and God is unhappy about that and believes human beings are supposed to have different languages and we're not supposed to walk in lockstep, and that's dangerous. And so we get the destruction of the Tower of Babel. So we are going to focus this time on the end of the story of the flood and what happens there as we stay with because I read another commentary that is dealing with this story from the aspect of shame. And of course, it jumped out at me once we had our conversation last week. And I don't think I've really ever understood the end of the story quite the way I do this year, given what we talked about shame in the garden. And it being related, shame cultures being related to the visual. So we're coming to the end of the flood narrative. Remember that in the ancient Near East, every culture had a flood narrative. So probably some kind of kernel of historic event, remembering, complete and utter devastation of everything they could see, which would make sense if you have a bad enough flood. Right? Think Katrina. So probably a memory of some catastrophic flooding that went as far as they could communicate to or to see. So for them, it's the whole world that's gone. Every single culture has a flood narrative with obviously a moral to the story. And you can look at the morals of each of their stories and compare it to ours. We've done that in past years. How is our story different in terms of why we tell a flood narrative? And so we're going to look at the end, the moral of the story, again this year, but in a little slightly different way. So let's come to the end of the actual flood narrative. And it was Uvachodesh Hasheni, the second month. On the 27th day of the month, Yavsha haaretz, that the earth was Yabasha, was now dry land. And God says to Noach, Tseh min hateva, get out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and the wives of your sons with you. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav has a teaching that says it's because Noach didn't want to come out of the ark, that God has to tell them to come out, that they were happy to stay ensconced in their little universe, and that we always, Teva, of course, in Hebrew also means word, and so that they wanted to be snuggled up in the word of Torah. They wanted to be in the Beis Midrash learning Torah and didn't want to come out and do life. And so God has to say, you can't just study, you have to come out and do life. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that's with you, birds and animals and everything that creeps on earth, and let them swarm on the earth. Ufaru uravu, viravu al haaretz. So they should be fruitful and multiply on the earth. Okay, so this is a echo of Eden, where God says to the earthling and Chava, pru urvu. You should be fruitful and multiply. Right? Say Noach uvanav ishto. So they do. They come out of the ark. So every beast and every crawling thing and every bird, everything that stirs on earth came out of the ark. Lemish pechotehem. So according to their families, meaning their species. And what is the first thing Noach does when he gets off the ark? Vayiven Noach mizbeach liyud he vav he. He builds an altar to Yud He Vav He, Vayikach mikol habehema haTorah, and takes from every pure or clean animal and every clean bird, and makes of it olot, an olah, a sacrifice, bamizbeach, on the altar. Vayarach Yud He Vav He et reach hanichoach, and God smelled the pleasant odor, and Yud He Vav He says to God's self, never again will I doom the earth because of humankind, since the devisings of the human mind are evil from youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living being as I have done. So long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Well, actually, look at the Hebrew. Lo yishbotu. They shall not what? None of those things will ever Shabbat. Okay. Vayivarech Elohim et Noach ve'et banav, and God blesses Noach and his sons and says, be fruit orvu, be fruitful and multiply. Everything, all the animals are going to be given into your hand. Now you can eat meat and grass and all the things that they were allowed to eat before. And so God has made a compromise that Eden was vegetarian, and it is no longer going to be a vegetarian world. God learns something about humankind and what human beings want to eat, right? That they want to eat meat, but they are not allowed to eat meat with its blood in it. They are not allowed to eat the lifeblood, the life force. And God now makes this a law. And you can't eat the life force of an animal, and you can't kill a human being. Murder now is, God is being very clear, is a crime. You'll remember we already have murder in the story of Cain and Abel. God now makes it clear that this is a law, and that capital punishment is the punishment for destroying the image of God, that is the human being. And now God says, I'm going to establish briti itchem, my covenant with you. So we have law giving. We have now a brit, a covenant, with what? With whom? Itchem, with y'all, and your offspring after you. Okay, so this is a covenant with the only human beings left, and all of their descendants to come after them, and with every living thing that have come out of the ark, which is the only living things on earth, right? So this covenant is with all of life, and I will maintain that covenant with you. And what is that covenant? Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God says, this is the ot. This is the sign. Remember, ot is always a good thing. It's always a positive, a sign that I set for you of the covenant between me and you, every living creature with you for all ages to come. I've put my bow in the clouds, and it shall serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature, so that the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures, all flesh that is on earth. That, God says to Noah, shall be a sign of the covenant that I've established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Okay, so we get the rainbow in the sky. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Cham, and Yafet. Cham being the father of Canaan, of the Canaanites. These were the three sons of Noah. From these, the whole world branched out. And now we get this bizarre episode that we're going to talk about relating to last week's conversation. Noach was the tiller of the soil, and so he's the first to plant a karem, a vineyard. and he drank of the wine, meaning from the vineyard, and he got drunk. And okay, now start paying attention. You see where I'm going to go with this. He gets drunk, and what does he do? He uncovers himself in his tent. Vayar Ham avichnaan et ervat aviv. And Ham, the ancestor of the Canaanites, saw his father's nakedness and went out and told his two brothers about it. But what Shem and Yafet did was they took a cloth, they placed it behind their backs, and walking backward, meaning without seeing, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way, so they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noach woke up from his wine and learned what his youngest son had done to him, we're not sure what that means, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers." Meaning this is an explanation of how the elephant got its trunk, why the Canaanites, right, were to be subject to the Israelites. It starts here because of what the ancestor of the Canaanites did. And Noach lived after the flood 350 years, and all the days of Noach came to 950 years, and then he died. Okay, so this odd story at the end of the flood narrative. Given what we talked about last week, already, what do you know I'm going to be pointing to and talking about?
The shame of the father and Noah and his son. But what is uncover his nakedness? Isn't that sometimes used not in a literal sense, to uncover the nakedness?
In this sense, it seems to be literal.
Right, I know, because they're walking backwards.
Correct.
But later isn't to uncover the nakedness of somebody is.
Yes. Later it can be a euphemism. Here it is literal. So he's literally naked in his tent. His son sees it and goes to tell the other two. The other two do something with a cloth so that they are not going to see the nakedness, and they're going to cover their father. Already we have echoes from last week. Rachel?
It seems to me that Noach is not embarrassed or ashamed of the nakedness so much as he feels he's been shamed by his son, who went and outed him.
Okay. So we have shame of some kind from something. We have nakedness involved with that shame. And what did we talk about last week? We talked about the visual, right? That shame is visual. They saw, right? They were naked. And we have they covered themselves with fig leaves, right? They cover themselves, and then God clothes them and covers their nakedness. So all of this, I don't think I ever put it together before, that this is exactly an echo of the issues we were dealing with last week, of shame being visual, shame cultures being very visual. And what did we say was auditory? And what did we say that was kind of talking about? It was talking about God giving them instruction, right? God giving them law. So we have it here too now. We have their own assessment of what's going on, and that's visual in a shame culture, but what God wants is righteousness. So God wants a guilt culture. So God again here gives law. Says no eating flesh with blood in it and no murder. All right. So the first thing Noach does when he gets off the boat is what? We just read. He offers a sacrifice. Okay. He has been tending these animals for the entirety of the flood. and then the entirety of what it takes for the land to be dry enough for them to get out of the ark. He's been on that boat a very long time, tending all of these animals. What is the first thing he does when he comes out of the ark? He kills one of each of the pure species and offers it on a mizbeach to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Who told him to do that?
Nobody.
You've been taking care of these animals for all this time, and your first impulse when you get off the ark after everything has been killed on the planet, you come out with the last living creatures, and he makes an altar and slaughters one of each of the pure animals and offers it to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Richard?
And I don't know if this is a textual question or a translation question, but as I read the English, it didn't say one of each. It just said all the pure animals.
Of the pure animals.
No, all of the pure animals.
No.
Well, okay. I thought
no, but I mean, I will check the text. But right. Yeah, no. He takes one, because remember we have two.
I understand that's the intent.
Right. Well, we have two flood narratives, right? We have one where there's just two of every kind, and the other story has 7 pairs of the pure and 2 pairs of the impure. So he took from one of the 7 pairs of pure animals. Okay. Bert?
When were the animals separated into pure and impure?
How does Noach know which is pure and impure?
Right. Isn't that much later with the sanctuary?
No. We are given what we're permitted to eat and what we're not permitted to eat. Right? So what's kasher and what's not kasher. But already there seems to be an understanding of there being categories of animals that were pure and categories that were impure. The rabbis, of course, have Noach knowing all of this, because how could God allow Noach to eat from animals that weren't pure? So Noach had to have that knowledge. But whose idea is it to kill and eat animals? Wait, where does that come from? Rachel?
Well, I was going to answer one of your earlier question, which is, I do think that earlier in the Parsha, God does say, when he's instructing Noah about which animals to bring, when he says 2 of every kind, he does designate some as pure and some as impure, doesn't he?
But we're not told which.
Right. So we're not told, but presumably Noah's been.
Presumably Noach knows which are the tahor and which are.
So he
not
would have.
tahor.
So he's been given law, but the sacrifice. I mean, so do we know in the Parsha that when he burns up the sacrifice that anyone's eating it?
Let's stay with, he offers the life of the animal and its flesh on the altar, and God receives the smell. Mm-hmm. Okay, the reach nichoach, the pleasant smell. We can just stay there. Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
And it could be irrelevant right now, but this idea of some animals being pure and impure, is this a metaphor for something larger?
We can talk about that when we talk about kashrut.
Awesome.
Right. We've had that conversation every time.
Yeah. But it's coming up here. So I was curious if it's, something bigger.
Possibly. So I think you should write that essay for next week.
Will do. On it.
And share it with the rest of us.
Okay.
All right. So let's look at why I'm focusing on this part. Obviously, if I'm focusing here, it's because I read something that focused here that I was interested in. Let's look at Leon Kass. I've never read his stuff ever before. Rabbi Michael Strassfeld quoted him, and then I went and looked up that text that he wrote, and It is from a book called The Beginning of Wisdom. So I went and found the book. All right. So let's look at what he has to say about the beginning of wisdom, from the beginning of wisdom. Noach, presumably in an act of thanksgiving and perhaps also hoping to stave off further rain, sacrifices some of the animals he rescued from the antediluvian world of violence and bloodshed. All right. So Leon Cass is going to remind us what happened before the flood. That everything was, remember, Hamas. Everything was Hamas, and people were doing terrible things, right? And God was just horrified at having and regretted having created the human being. And so it's that world that got destroyed and that the animals are saved from. Overwhelmed by the destructive power of nature, but perhaps even more impressed by his own salvation. And this, I can't apologize enough for the language. He's very gendered in his language. Man is moved by strong feelings of dread, awe, and gratitude to acknowledge the superiority and importance of the divine. Noah's protracted and close encounters with the other animals would, by themselves, have convinced him that he is more than just the chief among the animals, but his new awareness of divine power and divine providence, awareness not shared by the animals, confirms him in the belief that his species is special and thus separates him from animal relations. Noah's self-defining first act in the world is an act of violence against the living world. A simply harmonious world order led by a human being seems to be impossible. Okay, so look at this, which I've never really done. Look at this from God's perspective, right? Like, so God brings the flood in order to start with the best of what's left, which is Noach and his family. Noach was, as we've said, righteous in his generation, whatever that means. And so God does that. And what's the first thing this human being does after being someone who's fed and taken care of these animals for the whole entirety of the flood and the drying of the land? The first thing Noach does is an act of violence against the living world. In response to Noach's sacrifice, God does not praise man's generous impulses. On the contrary, God complains that the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. I never put that sentence together with the sacrifice before. That God smells the pleasing odor. So you kind of think God's pleased with the sacrifice idea. But what if that's not so? It just says God smells the pleasing odor. It doesn't say, and God was pleased. God smells a good smell. That doesn't mean God is pleased, because what's the next thing that God says? The imagination of the human being's heart is evil from his youth. From this explicit negative judgment, we might reinterpret the beginning remark to mean that God discerned that the smell of roasted meat was sweet to Noach. It was a pleasing odor to Noach. Not having been told how to express thanksgiving, Noach gave God a gift on the assumption that God would like what he, Noach, liked. Animal sacrifice, in fact, reveals nothing about God. It reveals a good deal about Noach. A preference for meat, or at the very least, a willingness to shed blood, meaning like out of gratitude and thanksgiving. To give of what one treasures most is praiseworthy. To kill animals and to relish their flesh is not. Even Noach, righteous and simple Noach, the new and better Adam, is not pure at heart and has a taste for blood. Okay, poor God, y'all. I feel so bad for God this week. Explicitly for this reason, God now decides against blotting out and starting over. I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake. So God decides not to start over. Why? Because it's pointless. As long as there's going to be human beings, They have these desires, they have these thoughts, they have these impulses that are never gonna change. To put it in simple terms, no human being following uninstructed, only the native inclinations of their heart will ever be content to be a pacific, nonviolent, fruit and seed-eating steward of living flesh. The way of nature must be replaced by the way of law. All right, now we're in last week's territory, right? God realizes they have to be instructed. They ate from the wrong tree. They have the wrong kind of knowledge. God wants righteousness and a guilt culture, not a visually based, doing it for other outside reasons, shame culture. And God learns it again this week and realizes there has to be now law given. Noach seeks a new relationship with the divine through sacrifice. The law will establish a new relationship with God through a demand for justice. A divinely backed law, humanly enforced, and a divinely pledged covenant, humanly recognized, together form a precise response to the inner meaning of Noah's sacrifice, seen as a search for contact with the divine. The New World Order takes human beings as they are, not as they might be. It does not try to obliterate their tendencies to wildness and violence. It tries rather to accommodate and restrain them by means of law. But this seemingly small innovation is of monumental importance, for the institution of law transforms the human world and thereby the world altogether. It creates new relationships between human beings and animals, humans and humans, humans and the cosmic order, and between each person and themselves. It requires and promotes new powers of mind and heart, largely unexercised before or unless man becomes law-abiding. It makes possible a new form of sociality, civil society, founded on shared explicit expectations and agreed upon notions of justice and punishment. Precisely as it restrains human impulses, it liberates human possibility. When at the end of the blessing of Noach and his sons, the command to be fruitful and multiply is repeated, it will be newly heard and it must be newly understood in the awesome light of the intervening requirements of law and justice. The natural good of life is now bound up with the legal good of right and the legal obligation to defend it. So what do we get? We get blessing, law, and covenant. Noach, the new human prototype, is told, yes, you have a special relationship to the divine because you are in God's image, but this means something other than possessing raw power, something other than devouring or drowning, in God's case, the animals and strewing or drinking their blood. It means accepting our godlike power to live justly and gratefully in a world not of our making. It means recognizing the unmerited and gracious hospitality of the world to human hopes and possibilities. A new relationship between human beings and God is blessing through commands, through a divine promise, and also through a visible sign, right? The keshet, the rainbow, whose meaning is, however, known only through speech, hearing, and memory. Right? That the rainbow itself doesn't do anything. It doesn't stop a flood. It's a symbol. But how does the symbol function? It functions by way of, right, speech, hearing, and memory. Noach's appeal to a corporeal God is answered by the arrival of an intellectual, moral, cosmological, and theological insight delivered through speech to the human heart and mind, the readers perhaps more than even Noach's. Okay. So God, once upon a time we talked about, many years ago, we talked about the verbiage Torah uses to talk about God's regret. And we talked about it being a self-reflexive verb in Hebrew, a hitpa'el form of a verb, and that it kind of is this roiling thing that happens within God's self, and it keeps going and becomes this tragic, awful regret that is so deep that God, out of that, balls up the whole thing and starts over. Now, God sees Noach, and according to this interpretation, Noach's first response to getting it that he's different from the animals, really, Adam had some of that insight, and then Noach, in tending the animals and in surviving the flood and taking care of them, understands that he's different than they are. He's higher in a way, if you will, than they are. What does he do out of that awareness? He kills one of each of the pure animals and offers it on an altar. So now, according to Leon Cass's reading, I feel terrible for God. God thought God was starting over, and instead we get more of the same. Except now, the thing created in the image of God is killing other life and offering it on the altar as a means of thanksgiving. And because God gives Noach and his people permission to eat the meat, presumably, there is something about wanting to consume flesh that God apprehends. Okay, so God now gives law, which means God gets it that human beings absolutely cannot be trusted on their own. There has to be law. There must be law for there to be civil society. Some violence will be tolerated because God realizes there's no other way to deal with human beings. They are violent, but there has to be restraints placed on that. Okay, Richard?
Thank you, Rabbi. Okay, in some kind of weird counterfactual way, what should Noah have done? What would have been more pleasing to God, not simply the smell, but say the avoidance of killing an animal? Presumably, when if I'm not mistaken, Abel would sacrifice the first fruits. Didn't he offer up the fruits when he was?
Yeah, but you're not killing fruit.
No, I understand that. But so back to my question. How does one express gratitude for having been saved?
We don't know.
Well, speculate.
We don't know, but
okay.
It seems from this commentary
and
God saying people are evil, that God is not. I'm just going with this idea that God, okay, which I've never seen it this way before, so it's fun. What if God is not pleased? It's not saying God is enjoying the odor. God is saying it's a pleasing odor to Noach.
I get that.
And that's why Noach offered it. But God is horrified.
Yes, I get that. But that seems to beg the question. Noah apparently did something wrong. Now maybe he couldn't help himself because sort of the evil is it's Adam 2.0, but now it's horrifically tainted. Right.
But he could have created a psalm. He could have done a rain dance. He could have beaded a garment and, done something. There's lots of things he could have done. He could have painted something. He could have written a piece of music. He could. Instead, his impulse out of Thanksgiving is to kill something and offer it to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, who just destroyed everything. Okay, Betsy?
So I find it sort of maybe hypocritical of God because it's confusing to me that on the one hand, God is complaining or finding this sacrifice and the killing of the animals and the sacrifice displeasing. But then on the other hand, God had given Noach and his people permission to eat flesh. And so why is it so awful that he he killed these animals to offer up to God, when God just said you can eat flesh, you can consume flesh. And also, after this, there are all these laws about sacrifice, and in great detail about where you bring the sacrifice and what it's supposed to be and what type of sacrifice. Well, if God is not reacting favorably to that sort of expression of gratitude, then why did God create all these laws surrounding the notion of sacrifice?
Okay, good. All right. So Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory would say, because God learned that there's not another way to deal with human beings. Human beings are going to kill.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can box that in and limit it so that they're only killing in a certain context, or they're just going to run amok. And that God is dealing with humanity as it is, not as God wishes it to be. And therefore, God puts restraints, the compromise God makes with the world to have it remain in existence, given what it is, given what human beings are. In order for it to stay in existence, God has to compromise. And God has to say, okay, you can kill and eat animals, but only these. And only in this way, and only on these occasions. And that all of the laws are a way of moving the world closer to what it should be from what it is. And that's all of Torah. So that's the tradition's answer to your question. Sacrifices for human beings, it's not for God. God knows that we need to kill and we want to eat meat. And so, okay, you can do that, but not whenever you want or however you want. Here are the restrictions. Okay. Robert?
Well, I too really learned something today that I never spotted before. That scares me even more than the thought that we need laws, and that was as I recall the way you read it. Basically, Noah came to the view that he was better than animals, and he was godlike and could do whatever he wanted, really. And even when you go back to we went back this year to the Garden of Eden, wasn't it sort of stated that if you eat, by the snake or whatever, if you eat from this tree, you're going to know things like God, you're going to be godlike. That is truly horrifying to me when you think about the human beings that come along and say, I am better than, and I am godlike.
And that's where we are.
And yes, if there really is a God up there listening to all of this, that would be very scary about what is going on.
And then think about, for me, this year, because I feel so bad for God this year, what that means, that God says, okay, I'm going to let this project go forward. That I now get it, that I'm going to have to give law, and I'm going to have to set limits, and I'm going to have to do this, and this for these creatures who think they're all that with a side of fries, and are going to destroy the beauty that I created, and are going to destroy other living creatures that I created. And, we're wiping out species now with our behavior. And so, I feel really, yes, Robert, I feel like this is tragic for God, who decides to let the project go ahead anyway. That God has a whole lot more trust, faith, something than I feel reading the story, right? And knowing what comes after in 2025, what's happening to, creatures on this planet that we have the ability to, and the wisdom and the knowledge to know we're destroying, and what we need to do to stop it, and we don't. Yeah, I feel bad. I feel really bad. Bert?
2 points. One relating to what Betsy said. Later, all of the laws, God says, this is the way you sacrifice, but only this way. And remember the 2 gentlemen who died because of the foreign fire. They didn't do the fire as it was commanded. So part of this, I relate, and I understand your point, Betsy, is that in a way God was saying, yes, you can kill animals to sacrifice, but it's got to be within limits. It's got to be according to the law. The other piece, and to me this presents a huge challenge to post-halachic Jews that I would consider Reconstructionism and Reformed obviously within that, is if you don't believe there's a commander and you don't believe that there's anyone to make laws, how can there be laws? And where do those laws come from? The interpretation you're giving, Amy, which I personally agree with, is that laws and control is absolutely necessary. But it gets to the question of, is obligation required, or is obligation just whatever and whatever Judaism?
Yeah, so that's a favorite Bert Kleinman question.
I think but I do think it's a challenge. On the one hand, saying, oh yes, society needs laws and people needs laws, but where do they come from?
Well, so for some of us, that's not the question, right? I get it. It is for you.
Well, what are they? And
for me, it's not. Like that's not the question. It is that if I'm in relationship to the source of life, if I'm in right relationship to the ground of all being, the mystery at the heart of reality, I know killing is wrong. Destroying species is wrong. If I'm lining up with all of the forces that I associate with godliness, holiness, righteousness, then I know it's wrong to kill. And then we as a society have to decide, okay, what do we understand if we're living in line with righteousness and goodness and holiness and all of that? What do we understand the law to be? That's my interpretation, and I'm fine with that. I don't need there to be a commander. I need there to be something that we try to line up with that helps us try to figure out what righteousness looks like given the complicated nature of human society. All right, Rachel, then Richard.
Thank you. I'm particularly interested in the aspect of this that is related, and not that murder isn't terrible, but the violence itself, but the related to domination and the idea that one is better than and it can be in control of domination versus stewardship and being in right relationship too. Because we have another episode, and I think again, I'm no expert, but where it's part of what leads to the flood and it has to do with a kind of, violence against women specifically, that isn't there a rabbinic interpretation even that says that, or raises the question, is part of what God is so angry about that, is it the Nephilim that are, consorting and just choosing from among women, in whatever way they see fit and taking them as mates, and that there's a kind of almost like just we can have whoever we want, whenever we want, kind of this idea that it's ours for the taking. And there does seem to be, this has been written about since the 1970s, among feminist scholars, this idea that, whether it's animals or the natural environment, whether you're, drilling for oil, whatever it is that you're doing, to kind of the natural world, that there's a deep connection between that and, a kind of, an idea of sort of, violence against, that there's kind of linking it to violence against, the feminine, the female, so it's that part of it that I find particularly interesting because that seems to be recurring in this as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. Thank you. Richard?
Rabbi?
Hang on. Richard?
Thank you. So going back a little bit to the sort of like, feeling bad for God, that to some extent he's having to settle for less and less in order to get what he really wants. and forgive the genderization.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if God himself is subject to the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Where, creation happens, the jars break, the shards are shattered and spread all across the universe. So then God has this conception that, well, I'm going to need some help putting all these sparks back where they came from. So I'll create a helpmate. And that's Adam and Eve, right? And he gives them essentially one simple instruction, which we know what happens there. And then, so then we have this whole episode with the flood and everything. And God basically, by this point, is saying, oh, I guess this is going to take a lot longer than I thought, because I had no idea that when I created such finite beings, they would be that finite that they could not even comprehend some of these elemental basic truths about justice and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what's going on here.
I agree.
Okay,
I'll
let you do this. I'll let you do that. Okay, it'll take
because
a little
I get
longer.
it that you can't help yourselves.
But it's sort of like the more advanced you get, the more it's really on you. This is like really no longer on me.
Yes, and yes. Elena, then Betsy.
My question is a bit off and chronological. You mentioned at the beginning that the Canaanites were in this Noah story, and they're also in the Moses coming out into the land of milk and honey. And I'm wondering, what is the year expanse of all this? How does it fit in chronologically?
I'm not sure what the question is.
I'm sorry. I just want to know how long the Canaanites are a people, because I was surprised that you mentioned them at the beginning with Noah.
Okay,
and
so
they appear to me mostly with Moses. And
the Israelites are writing this story.
Right.
So the Israelites who know the Canaanites are writing a story about the beginnings of humanity. Well, there have to be Canaanites there. There has to be the ancestor of the Canaanites at the beginning of the world, or how did the Canaanites get here? Right?
But they're already Canaanites when Noah shows up.
There's the ancestor of the Canaanites.
Okay.
The same way we have the 12 brothers being the ancestors of the tribes. These are stories written to explain reality as the Israelites confronted it.
Got it.
So if you're talking about reality, there has to have been a start to the Canaanites. So let's put it at, if Noach was the first human, the Canaanites must be descended from the same human ancestor as the Israelites.
Okay.
Because there's only Noach. Okay. Betsy?
So you and Richard, I think, were talking about looking at things from God's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to share that I never really thought of things in those terms, but until recently, after the hostages were released, the recent ones, I was listening to one guy who had been in captivity talking about how he found God in the cave. He was kept in a tunnel, and so like 24/7, no light, just total darkness. And the way he survived and got through it was he basically found God, but the way he explained, he described it, some of you probably saw the same video that I did, but he was talking about how he would talk to God and feel God's presence. And he said, we're always asking God for this and that, and asking God for favors and to protect us and to rescue us. And he said he started asking God, how are you doing, God? Like, what's up with you and how are you? And it really twisted things, and it helped him survive this trauma.
Right. Like God having to watch this unfold.
Yeah.
Nice. Alex?
I really like that, going beyond ourselves, what you were just saying in terms of asking God how they are doing, but I guess my question is, Rabbi Amy, is it God we feel bad for, or is it really humanity and the human condition?
Both. I don't think you can separate them.
Because it's not, I don't even see this feeling bad for God. It's feeling bad for if we're looking at the way that Noah, that potential for, or capacity, right, for evil, then, I see it as both, but I mainly see it as, I feel so bad for the human condition.
But that's why I feel bad for God. It's because humans are so messy, right? And so many are going to suffer that it's like, okay, we're talking about a character God. All I'm saying is in the story, I feel for the character God in this story. If we're going to talk about my theology, it might be a little different, obviously.
Okay.
And there are times where, like when Elie Wiesel was asked, where was God during the Holocaust? Do you remember his answer? God was in heaven weeping. So there are times where my theology, even, forget the character God, my actual theology is that the universe grieves for our fuck-ups, pardon my French. That the universe itself grieves, the consciousness, the over-consciousness, capital C, of the universe grieves for what we do to each other. That is a powerful theological image for me.
Mm.
Do I have a God that thinks? No. Do I believe there might be a consciousness at the heart of all this business? Yeah. And that it suffers because of our choices. And sometimes, gets to revel in our choices.
Mm-hmm.
When we help each other out, when we perform what my colleague who's going to come teach. So you have to look for this, November 16th, Rabbi Mike Moskowitz, who we had teach before.
Yeah.
He's going to come teach on November 16th, and he's teaching about micro affections.
I think this goes back to our discussion we had I think it was actually with Rabbi Daniel, about this idea of an abundance of curses versus the small blessings. To me, it just connects so much to that. I think it was Ki Tavo. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that. No. But there's so much connection there.
Okay. I want to close with Mijal Biton, who wrote a piece called The Curse of the Rainbow. Are we American Jews prepared for what's coming? And she wrote it this year on this Parsha. Think of Noah's life in 3 acts. Before the flood, he's righteous. During the flood, he saves humanity and every animal species. After the flood, he plants a vineyard, gets drunk, and shames himself before his children. The man who saved the world can no longer live in it. Here's my theory about what went wrong after this. Noah misunderstood. He saw the rainbow as permission to rest. The world is safe now. The struggle is over. He could finally exhale. But life after the flood still demanded work, hard, messy work, building a civilization, managing family tensions, dealing with his own trauma and his son's dysfunction. The world still needed tending. Noach wasn't ready for that kind of struggle. He'd prepared his whole life for catastrophe, for survival, for rescue, but he had no framework for the slower, subtler work of living after disaster. So this resonated for me both in terms of our local disaster, but also, she's writing after, the disaster of October 7th and the aftermath. That's the trap. When we believe we've reached safety, we lose the capacity to face what comes next. The expectation of ease weakens the very muscles that help us endure. For decades, we American Jews have lived under our own rainbow. We never called it that, but we acted as if safety were permanent, secured through liberalism, tolerance, and memory of the Shoah, the post-war order, the Civil Rights Coalition, social acceptance. We thought we'd finally earned Jewish safety, the so-called American Jewish exceptionalism. We were so confident in it that we stopped worrying about anti-Semitism altogether. The rainbow was a test Noach failed. The question for American Jews is whether we'll fail too. Will we keep planting vineyards in a diaspora we mistake for Zion, or will we learn what Abraham knew, that Jewish life has never been about safety, but about purpose, agency, and the daily choice to build, to fight, and to resist the seduction of rest. I would say of only rest. There is no happily ever after. There never was. To be a Jew is to struggle, not bitterly, but faithfully. We live, rejoice, and insist on Jewish joy, knowing the covenant never promised ease. Our task is not to wait for safety, but to choose life. So, I will leave us with that the rainbow's God's promise, but that Noah kind of blew it. God promises anyway, and God is going to hold God's self to that promise anyway. But Noah got it wrong. He spends his time drinking and hanging out naked in his tent and whatever because he thought the work was over. And I think what Mijal Bitan is pointing out is that that's the beginning of society. Like, it's not over just because we've survived the worst. That's not the point. That he missed the point of the whole thing, which is to build a different kind of society. And the fact that he thought existentially, okay, that's over, now we can rest, is how he blew the whole thing, and got it wrong. And that God has to spend a lot of time and energy figuring out how to get humanity to a place where they can understand that there is no happily ever after. We always have to work. We have to lean into Torah, whatever we understand that to be right now. Exactly right, Rachel. That's exactly what I thought about, was this micro affection stuff that Mike Moskowitz is talking about, is saying it takes little acts, but constant acts of life-affirming building, trusting, hoping, creativity, innovation, strength, courage, perseverance, persistence, patience. It's going to require all of that. And to think there's going to be a time where we don't have to deal with that is the wrong message. That's not the point. God is saying the point is, I guess I'm going to have to give them law, and they're going to have to figure out what the law is for themselves by appointing judges and all this other stuff that's going to have to happen. But that's the work, is building civilization. It's not about saying, okay, now we get to relax and have a party. That is not the point of existence. We are meaning-making creatures, and our existence must be about meaning-making and taking responsibility for the rest of creation, not to say, okay, now we get to put our feet up, have a cocktail and call it a day. I think she's right, and I needed that message this week. I needed that message this year. I needed that message looking at what's happening post Gaza war. Let's hope it's post Gaza war, but looking at where's everybody yelling and screaming about Hamas murdering innocent Palestinians now? Where's any outrage about the Palestinians being murdered now? Oh, suddenly everyone who's whatever is silent, is quiet. Really? Okay. So it's a bigger mess in some ways than ever. And how are we going to come through this? This country is in such a state, but I really needed her teaching that, guess what? There's never going to be a rainbow that you get to then put your feet up and go, we're done. That's not the point. That's not a Jewish story. The Jewish story is, how do we find the koyach? How do we find, the energy and the creativity and the innovation and the commitment and the will to live into what it means right now for us to do the small things we can to move the whole project the ways that we can. That is the eternal covenant. That God promises not to wipe us out because we can't seem to get our act together. And we promise to keep working also on behalf of creatures that depend on us and are impacted by us, and other human beings who are impacted by our decisions. And those of us on the higher end of that scale, in terms of being impactful rather than impacted, we have responsibilities. We have a covenant to live up to and to live into. And that our job is to keep each other going so that we can contribute in the best ways we can to the best of what humanity is capable of. Shabbat Shalom.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.